Good evening and welcome. I'm Azazel, and tonight's episode will be a little different. Originally, this episode was to cover 3 different stories, but instead I would like to delve a little deeper into just one, Tadao Park, a park that is allegedly haunted by the ghosts of the Great Tenmei Famine, one of the deadliest famines to ever hit Japan. Today on Ghostly Japan. A little under 4 kilometers from the bustling department stores and shops around Machida Station is the peaceful and relaxing Tadao Park. Located in between the neighborhoods of Tadao and Yamazaki-machi, Tadao Park was built in 1977. The park incorporates wetlands and a small forested area alongside a softball field and a cherry blossom viewing area. There is also an interpretive center offering visitors information on the wildlife and plant species found in the park. The park is popular with locals. On the weekends, one can expect to find elderly residents walking through the park while happy children run to and fro with nets trying to catch the very small critters that make their home in the ponds and wetlands. A park so full of life and cheer seems like an unlikely place to encounter the paranormal, but stories shared by residents of the area reveal a tragic past whose victims come out to stalk the park after sunset. According to the tale, before the park was established, there once had been a small rice farming community situated in the wetlands. However, fortune was not with this small village, as the promise of a better life caused people to move away, and the village began to die, until eventually, only one house in the village was left. According to legend, an old woman was the last holdout, and eventually, she took her own life in her very home. In the following decades, the village was neglected, and nature began to reclaim the buildings. The old woman's home became nicknamed Ganyaraya, and it was said that her spirit could be seen near the tree outside her home where she decided to end her life. When the park was built, the surviving structures were removed, and allegedly a small modest wooden marker was erected on the site of the former haunted Ganyaraya. While I was unable to find any proof of this supposed wooden marker, the name Ganyara does live on in this park in the form of the name of the interpretive center and one of the ponds found in the park. This name has a long association with the wetlands locally. The Gani in Ganyara comes from the freshwater crabs that inhabit the waters. Kani is the word for crab in Japanese, and this becomes Gani in this case. The Yara is derived from Yato, or lowland, which refers to the park being in a small valley. If you do manage to find the rumored wooden marker, beware that you might just chance an encounter with the ghost of Ganyaraya. There is one more ghost in Tadao Park. This one is said to be that of an old woman who can be seen walking around the underside of the bridge that goes over the park on the eastern side of the park. She is said to be appearing in the former spot of a Jizo that had been erected in the Edo period to memorialize the local victims of the Great Tenmei Famine. During this famine, the elders opted to voluntarily starve themselves so as to prolong the meager food stores for the younger members of the village, thus giving them a better chance of survival. For this heroic sacrifice, the elders were memorialized with a Jizo to remember them. Unfortunately, in 1983, the Jizo was vandalized and the body was stolen. The Jizo was rebuilt and moved to its current location 500 meters to the northeast of the park. The current memorial sits by a nondescript intersection in Yamazaki-machi. The Great Tenmei Famine occurred from 1782 to 1788. It is the deadliest famine in the Edo period and one of the worst in all of Japanese history. The famine was caused by environmental factors, but its severity was greatly magnified by human mismanagement. The decade preceding the famine saw decreasing crop yields, especially in the Tohoku region of Japan. This was due to a period of cooler temperatures and drought, coupled with the fact that at this point in history, the predominant type of rice grown in Japan was not a cold-tolerant species. As far as the human factor goes, during the Edo period, the ruling Tokugawa shogunate took the payment of taxes from the various clans in the form of a percentage of the harvest. Leading up to the famine, there had been a number of reforms aimed at rectifying trade imbalances between the lands held by the shogunate and the various clans subordinate to them. These reforms and initiatives were the brainchild of Tanumu Okitsugu, a senior advisor to the shogun. They focused on an attempt to commercialize the rice trade, debasing currency, increasing foreign exports, massive investment in expansion of agricultural infrastructure, and granting monopolies on various industries. Okitsugu's reforms were marked by rampant corruption in the government. In 1782, a bad harvest in western Japan caused the price of rice to spike on the national exchange. The leaders of various Tohoku-based clans, which had an average harvest that year, took advantage of the high prices by sending much of their harvest to the markets in Edo and Osaka. This left little rice stored in the Tohoku region. On April 13, 1783, Mount Iwaki erupted, followed by Mount Sama erupting on July 6th. Combined with the eruption of Mount Laki in Iceland, the ash cloud blocked out the sun and led to unseasonably cold temperatures. The cold weather did not bode well for the year's harvest, and speculation on the rice market led the price of rice to continue to rise. While some domains began to institute measures to conserve rice, such as the banning of the brewing of sake, other domains such as Hirosaki continued to export rice to the market to take advantage of the rising prices. As 1783 came to a close, the reality of a widespread and severe famine began to become reality. Various domains scrambled to attempt to buy rice on the national market, but the increased demand only raised the price even higher. Additionally, given the dire situation nationwide, few domains were willing to sell rice in such uncertain times. As the price of rice continued to soar, the shogunate was slow to intervene, especially since they were benefiting from the increased price since taxes came in the form of rice. It was also the view of several senior advisors that if the shogunate's income increased, then consequently the samurai class's income would also be increased, and with the increased purchasing power amongst the samurai class, the lower classes in the communities they ruled over would also eventually benefit as well. Thus, those in the position of power had a disincentive to try to quash the rising price of rice. By the end of 1783, social order began to unravel in the Tohoku region as starving peasants began to riot throughout the region and storm storehouses in a desperate search for rice, only to find those storehouses empty. The exact death toll from the Great Tenmei Famine is not known. The numbers that were recorded are considered unreliable since the Tokugawa government did not want it reflecting poorly on their management of the calamity, but most estimates place the low range around 100,000 to around 500,000. With some estimates even going as high as a little over 1 million. What we do know is that while the famine affected pretty much all of Japan to some degree, the northern half, the Tohoku region in particular, suffered disproportionately so. The selling of their rice reserves in 1782 left Tohoku unable to respond in any meaningful way. In some areas, the population is reported to have dropped by a third to one-half. The Tokugawa's official census gives some idea of the scale of the loss. In the 1774 census, the shogunate recorded 25,990,000 souls across Japan. In 1780, 26,010,000. In 1786, 25,090,000. And in 1792, 24,890,000. However, cold numbers fail to convey the horror that befell the country. For that, we have the contemporary statements of scholars and travelers. One survivor recalled that after all of the food was gone, they turned to eating dogs, cats, birds, horses, and other beasts of burden. When all of those were gone, they began to eat the recently deceased. Genpaku Sugita, a contemporary scholar, recorded one case where a traveler encountered a man selling dog meat under a bridge. However, there were no dogs or any animals left in the area. There were, however, plenty of dead bodies of human victims along the roads. After conversing with the merchant, the man gathered that in reality, the dog meat was human flesh mixed with leaves and grass. Masumi Sugae, who traveled to Tsugaru in modern-day Aomori, wrote that when he entered the town, the sides of the streets were littered with piles of bleached human bones. When he questioned the residents to whose bones these were, the man replied they were the bones of the starving dead. There are many other accounts that reference large numbers of bones or bodies on the sides of the roads of Tohoku. The one common thread in all of these accounts is how shocked the observer is at the sheer number of dead. But perhaps the most gruesome account comes again from Genpaku, who records this shocking instruction on how to ensure nothing is wasted from a corpse. After butchering all of the flesh from the corpse, cut off the head and remove the skin from it. Bake the skull. After the fire breaks open a crack in the skull, using a spatula, scoop out the brains and mash it with some leaves and roots. Cook it and eat it. 1784 and 1785 brought floods and abnormal weather in central and southern Japan that reduced crop yields. The shogunate attempted to intervene by deregulating the distribution of rice, but it instead encouraged further speculation and caused the price to rise again. Regulations were reintroduced, but did little to curb the rising price. Other interventions by the shogunate at best resulted in mixed success. Tanuma Okitsugu's policies, whether rightly or wrongly, became blamed for the deteriorating situation. He was unpopular amongst other senior government officials and the common people as well. In 1784, Okitsugu's son, Tanuma Okitomo, who himself was a junior advisor within the Tokugawa government, was assassinated by Sano Masakoto, a samurai of the Edo Castle Hatamoto Guard. Okitomo and his father had been coming back from a meeting of advisors to the shogun when Sano ambushed him outside of their norimono, or litter. The samurais claimed to have bellowed, "Oboe garo! Oboe garo! Oboe garo!" Remember, 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 before cutting down Okitomo. Officially, Sano gave no reason for the assassination. The shogunate stated that it was a moment of insanity, and there were rumors that Tanuma's rivals within the government had been involved. In any case, the killing of a senior government official could not go unanswered, so Sano was ordered to commit seppuku for the killing. In death, Sano became deified as Yono Oshi Daimyojin, great patron of renewal. Festivities were held in his honor at his gravesite. Tanuma's detractors claimed that it was a divine judgment that had caused Sano to assassinate the younger Tanuma. By 1786, crop yields in Tohoku had started to recover, while the rest of Japan continued to suffer poor harvests. This time, clan leaders in Tohoku were reluctant to release any of their stored rice to market, since the memory of the nightmarish famine was still fresh in mind. This kept the supply of rice low on the market and kept prices high. By the end of 1786, Tanuma Okitsugu had been forced to resign his position, although a number of officials loyal to him remained in power, thus he still wielded considerable political power in an unofficial capacity. While central and southern Japan did not suffer the apocalyptic scale of death that Tohoku did, the skyrocketing price of rice caused monumental upheaval, especially in the urban centers of Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka, which had seen a large influx of peasants from the rural areas in the preceding decades to fuel the growth of the cities. These peasants were especially vulnerable to the rising price of rice since they didn't earn much to begin with. A large proportion of the peasants also rented their accommodations. This all meant that not only were the peasants at increased risk of starvation, but also of becoming homeless if they could not pay their rent as well. By May of 1787, riots broke out in Osaka and spread to the surrounding communities. In Edo, warning signs were flashing in June as reports of sporadic unrest accompanied by a rash of suicides by destitute and hopeless peasants at a number of bridges in the city were reported. On July 5th, rioting broke out in the center of Edo and began to spread outward. Initially, the rioting was targeted specifically at the rice shops and markets. By the 8th of July, the violence exploded and general looting and rioting broke out. In the capital of the shogunate, lawlessness and anarchy prevailed. Troops from domains loyal to the shogunate were ordered into Edo to restore order. It took until the 10th for the rioting to be subdued. Tanuma's opponents in the government stated that while the assassination of Okitomo 3 years prior had been divine judgment, the rioting in Edo was the people's judgment. While the riot was eventually quelled, it did contribute to the shogunate's decision to purge Tanuma's officials from the government. His replacement, Matsudaira Sadanobu, effectively reversed many of the reforms and measures that Tanuma had put into place. After the famine passed, a number of monuments and memorials were erected. One such monument was erected in Hachinohe. On the back of the stone monument, they recorded various data points of the conditions of the famine locally. Everything from weather, crop yields, population, how the famine had progressed, the breakdown of social order, disease and epidemics that flourished in the aftermath, and there is one additional bit that was recorded on how to prepare human bodies for consumption. recorded for posterity so that future generations might learn something from the horrors their ancestors lived through. Although at some point in the Meiji period, apparently town elders felt the portion on the butchering and cooking of human flesh reflected poorly on the people in Lord of Hachinohe, so that portion was scrubbed from the monument. There were more famines after the Great Tenmei Famine, but the severity was not nearly as widespread or as severe, in part because the Tokugawa government responded in a more proactive manner. Also, the government made sure to maintain an adequate store of rice in reserve, and when the next famine did hit, the distribution of salvation rice, rice given out to the starving, helped to blunt the worst of the famine. These were not new ideas. They had existed prior to the Great Tenmei Famine, but that famine drove home the importance of maintaining that strategic reserve and the necessity of the government to provide at least some assistance to the most unfortunate, unless anarchy and lawless were allowed to rule. The ghosts of Tadao Park are a reminder of the Great Tenmei Famine and the horrors it visited on the people of Japan. But they also remind us of the sacrifice of the elders of the old village of Yamazaki and Machida during the darkest years of the Great Tenmei Famine. If thrust into a similar situation, would you make the same choice as the elders of Yamazaki, to voluntarily starve yourself to give the next generation a better chance? With nothing left to eat, could you bring yourself to eat human flesh? How far exactly would you be willing to go to survive? It's a question hopefully none of us will have to answer. Thank you for watching. In the next Ghostly Japan video, we'll finish our exploration of Machida. We'll drive through Machida's own haunted tunnel, plagued by accidents and a human-shaped stain that reportedly won't go away. And finally, perhaps the most haunted spot in Machida, we'll travel down the innocuously named Onryoku-do, or Green Ridge Road, more infamously known as Tank Road, one of the former proving grounds for the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II, and reportedly haunted by ghosts of Japanese soldiers. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please consider hitting the like and subscribe. Have a wonderful evening, and see you in the next installment of Ghostly Japan.